Team, welcome back to another episode on the Live, Perform, Compete podcast. I am joined by Ben Patrick, and I'm just going to explain this situation real quick. He is currently strolling through Hollywood, baby on belly, on daddy duty. He's trying to squeeze in this podcast on a very busy schedule. So, Ben, I appreciate your time. Thanks for being here. How are you doing?
I'm super excited to do the podcast, and yeah, just a little mix up with my wife. She's not ready. Onyx chat through his outfit, but we got it done. We got a new outfit on him, and I'm ready to podcast it up.
Awesome. So Ben, listen, as soon as I started the podcast at the start of this year, you were one of the first names I had down to want to speak to.
Oh, awesome.
Just because it was really, you were very prevalent in my life at the time. A lot of the listeners will know my journey with injury in sport, knees being a big part of that injury journey. And
Yep.
I remember at Knees Over Toes Guy on Instagram popping up every now and then on my YouTube and my Instagram. Genuinely had absolutely no idea who you were. And it wasn't until a couple of coaches in my organization started getting involved in the Real Movement organization that suddenly your face came within my gym somehow, because two of my coaches were on your program. And I started reading about Knee Ability for Life, which is, one of the kind of the core programs that you put together to kind of bulletproof people's knees, both for athletic performance, but also for longevity. And, someone myself resonated with a lot of your background. I was educated under Charles Poliquin's PICP many, many moons ago.
Yep.
So understood all the structural balance ratios, but, you kind of had packaged this thing in a very unique way to me that had some beautiful gold standards to aim for. And I had a natural attraction to your program. And, I'm now kind of 10 months in and still incorporating a lot of the principles that you kind of brought to the world. And I want to say thank you, firstly, because you've been a massive difference to my health. But I'd love to kind of dig into your story first. How did you go from Ben Patrick to the guy who's now at Knees Over Toes Guy?
Well, let's see. It started out, my sport was basketball. So I was just obsessed with basketball and trying to get good at basketball. And when you're a kid, you don't know any better. You just assume that the harder you work, the better you'll get. Well, I mean, that was true to some degree with my skill set. But by 12, I already had knee pain, and so doctor said I was just growing pains. By 14, it was really nasty. My teammates and coaches had all nicknamed me the old man because it would take me so long to warm up. By 18, I'd already had 3 surgical knee alterations. So I was bitter. I was depressed. I was hooked on painkillers, icing my knees 4 times a day. All because I wanted to play basketball, and it became this source of misery for me. So this wasn't just like a normal case. And I decided I didn't have a plan B in life, no plan B. So I decided, well, I'm going to have to devote my life to figuring out how to bulletproof my knees so I can play basketball. And so I would say the first real truth I found was from Charles Poliquin, who had this quote that said, basically, the stronger and farther your knees can go over your toes, the more protected you are. Now, for probably a lot of listeners, they may have even had good coaches and, who instructed them properly. But no joke, up to this time in the US, I had been to dozens of trainers, and I had only been prohibited from knees over toes. So it doesn't mean that all trainers prohibit knees over toes, but I'm telling you, the overwhelming majority just flat out prohibit it. And when I saw that, I knew, like, okay, it all sunk in. Like, I've been going about it backwards. So I started scouring the internet, trying to find examples of people doing this. And I found Keegan Smith because, Charles was older. He didn't necessarily have a lot of videos on what to do, but he had good, books and stuff like that. Although, as you know, his books delved more into bodybuilding and
only.
Right. And so I spent about $10,000 going and learning personally from Charles. And he told me a lot of the athletic stuff that he really reserved for in-person seminars, that there is no right. A lot of the best stuff I learned from him, he never wrote a word about it. So I was able to take his knowledge. I was in my early 20s when I went and met him, actually early to mid 20s. So I was still at an age when I could, really apply all this stuff on my own body. So I've got to live these 2 different lives now. So now I can do the dunks and and the impressive things with my knees that get the attraction on social media, that if I had maybe not been such a psychopath kid in terms of how hard I worked and how much I beat up my knees, maybe I would have been coming onto this stuff a little too late. So I feel like that was how this came about, is that I was the kid who was already broken down at such a young age that I didn't have responsibilities in life. I didn't have a family, kids of my own, or I didn't have to make ends meet with a job. I painted walls during the day while funding my research, and I would sit there and paint walls for like 10 hours with no iPod and just think about the process. So my problems happened at a young enough age that I was still able to devote my life and use my body as an experiment of knees over toes. And now, to give it to people really simply, I mean, I think you should be strong everywhere in your body. So it's not that you should only be strong with your knees over your toes. It's that your knees over your toes aren't an exception, that you should, neglect this important area. And it really, what Charles said is 100% true. The stronger and farther you can go your knees over your toes, the more protected your knees are. And so I've been able to help, I've got 1,750 knee success stories for others now. And I keep my life pretty simple and focused on how to help people do that.
Awesome. Where did this stigma arrive that the knees should not travel over the toes? Because I mean, certainly, even 10, 15 years ago, the squat was taught, with hips backwards, vertical shin, whereas you looked at the Olympic lifting fields, knees were very far over the toes. You look at athletic performance, which you always showcase, the importance of the knee tracking over the toe. Where did this stigma arrive that we shouldn't be doing it? And where did we all get lost in thinking that it wasn't a good, healthy movement?
For sure. It's pretty easy to trace. I mean, there's a 1978 Duke study that basically determined that when your knee goes over your toe, it puts more pressure on your knee. So there's not actually any studies showing that it's bad for your knees to go over your toes, only that it puts more pressure. So this is an easy way. It's so easy with a client to just say, oh, don't let your knee over your toe. That puts more pressure on your knee. Well, how about just don't train your entire body? Because that's what training is. Training is putting pressure on things, but it's putting the right amount of pressure. You want to get your chest stronger? Try dropping off a house onto your, into a push-up position. You might tear a pec. So it's not any of these concepts with our body. It's all based on progressive overload and giving stimulus and adaptation. But what's interesting is the knees or anything else, you don't find research showing that confronting an area is bad. You only find now that the better someone is on a step down test with their knee over the toe, the less chance of knee surgery. The better the ankle mobility of the knee going over the toe, the less chance of knee surgery. The better someone can fully bend, the less chance of knee surgery. We only have examples when you look at the product that the better and farther your knee can go over your toe, the more protected you are. But this got everyone into, such a frenzy of don't let your knees over your toes. So there's these things like this, don't let your knees over your toes, or don't round your back, just because there's more pressure on that. But that actually could be the very most important thing to protect your body. It's very interesting that you can't go down steps without your knee going over your toe. So saying don't let your knee go over your toe is like saying don't train the number one most important defense mechanism for your knees. And the result is we get these legs that can still get some pretty bulky upper thighs, but then they don't have as much of that lower teardrop, which is actually the most fast twitch of the quads and is the biggest and closest muscle to your knee to protect it. So even if you look at, American training versus maybe, Asian training, you'll see that the Chinese have much bigger VMOs because they actually train with more knee over toe. If your knee hurts in the Chinese Olympic weightlifting team, they throw you on a slant board for your squat. So if your knee hurts to the Chinese, they see you need stronger knees, not to avoid. But in America, if your knee hurts, they say, okay, sit back more in your squat. That's like saying, we're not going to confront this problem now, but we're going to directly create a problem for you later and make you much more likely to have surgery. You could take this for any issue in life. Don't confront it now. Let's just, let's have inflation and let's just not confront any of our problems now. And then it's going to be disaster later, whether it's government or anything else. Don't confront an issue now, and it could be a disaster later. Whereas it might take a little effort and it might take a little energy to study and get good at something and face it head on right now. And then it's not a problem for you later.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually so true. Many other parallels in life. I think a lot of people might be
knees over toes. How about don't, pour inflation and ruin your economy. So people
Yeah.
are so shocked, like, wow, how could this go on without knees? Or how could knees over toes? How could that myth occur? How about all the other ridiculous stuff going on in the world? How could, our presidential elections are like one shithead after another shithead. It's like, how does that happen? So people have their head in the sand if they're shocked and they can't believe that a myth so bad could prevail. Trust me, knees over toes is one of many ridiculous things that media has pushed on us that doesn't actually work.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say there, I think a lot of people might be listening to this thinking, okay, well, I've actually been avoiding the knees over toe movement, and which, I'll put my hand up as well, having been in sport for a very, very long time and was exactly that example, started to deal with knee
So was
issues
I.
after surgeries, yeah, and started to avoid the movement altogether. And then actually
Yep.
after kind of following you and doing my research and what you were doing was actually a bit of kind of a paradigm shift to be like, well, actually don't be afraid of it and actually start to expose that range. But as you talk about a lot, there's a way to dose it, right? You don't just
Exactly.
go from avoiding knees over toes for a really long time to suddenly, going to full knee flexion loaded squats. And so maybe I wanted to talk about the system that you created, knee ability, which is a pretty cool way that you've brought, a lot of like individualized principles into a group format or kind of like an open format for people to understand. So what's your process now taking someone with generally, we'll have to generalize a little bit here, but who's suffering from knee pain, perhaps been
Yeah, but
avoiding
I can
knees over
layer it
toes?
for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can layer it for you just like what you're talking about, right? Because I don't even have anything against any movements, right? So take a deadlift or even a powerlifting style squat. The best coaches who teach a powerlifting style squat are not just having the guy max out on day one with shit form, right? So it's no different with knees over toes. The best coaches are going to get people's form really good and are going to gradually build them up, right? I've never seen someone teach deadlift by telling someone to just go for a max weight without even learning how to do the lift, right? So if we layer it, so like right now, I'm walking backwards. That would be the absolute lowest level. So walking backwards, anyone can stand up who's listening right now. And if you stand there on two legs and you reach 1 foot behind you to walk backwards, your knee is already over your toe. So walking backwards is the lowest level of knees over toes. And walking backwards alone has been used really successfully by the Chinese, who have one knee replacement in their elderly for every 19 of our US knee replacements. And Australia and some of the European countries are trailing right along because they jump right on the American method so quickly. And what's funny is China's only seeing a spike in knee problems as more of their sports training facilities adopt the no knees over toes. So walking backwards, that's been passed down from generation to generation by Chinese elderly to prevent arthritis in the knees. So many people listening to this will be like, oh shit, you know what? I've seen a bunch of crazy Asians out in a field walking backwards. It's really common for people to have seen that. Chinese elderly walk backwards so they stay strong with their knees over their toes. And even though in the US, we've never done a long-term study on it, even though it's quite obvious that we should, but we did do a study and found that backwards walking alone is an effective screening process for falling in elderly. So we think of heart disease and cancer, but like in the United States, there's more ER visits and more death in elderly from falling, meaning we literally don't have the strength to catch our bodies. And backwards walking alone for elderly can largely handle that issue. But for an athlete who's going to be experiencing more force, now you'd want that backward walking to be with a sled. Meaning, if I was, your sport is rugby, correct?
It was, yeah. CrossFit now, I
Okay.
guess.
All right. So if I'm training a rugby team, my team would never run extra. They would never do extra running as punishment because you already run plenty in the sport. But that's beside the point. But the point is, my team for conditioning, I would line up sleds and every athlete would have a given amount of weight, say 100 kilos. The amount of weight is relative to the surface. Different sleds and different grasses and whatever have different friction. So for your gym or your team, you have to find the weight that burns best. Too heavy, you can't get into a rhythm. You can't really step behind it and work your knees over your toes. You're really just putting your weight back against it. And too light won't burn. So let's say 100 kilos on the sled. I'd have my whole team line up and I'd want to know who on the team is strongest backwards. The guy who's strongest backwards is going to have the least injuries when he's playing. So it's those decelerators that are protecting you. You can train them by going backwards. So for an old person, walking backwards 15 minutes a day would be great. For an athlete, if I'm an athlete, I want to go into every game knowing I'm the strongest person on the court. For me, it's basketball. Now, every time I play, I'm the strongest backwards of anyone on the court. So I can cut harder, run faster, jump harder. I can play with more violent aggression without the impact going in through my feet and ankles and knees to the degree of other players, because my muscles are stronger backwards. So I would make sure that every guy in my team could beat every guy on the other team backwards. So from there, because everything I've described so far is just going backwards, it's just getting stronger backwards. So you're strengthening those VMOs and you're strengthening all the muscles and tissues that are going to be under load when your knee is over your toe, but you're doing so without the eccentric contraction. So you can recover from it very fast. You could do it very often. Now I'm going to go out to a curb. So as simple as standing on this curb, and now I'm going to reach my other heel down to the floor. So if you stand on a step or a curb and you do a step down, so it's a reverse step up. So you're not facing the curb, you're facing away from the curb. And just by stepping down, controlling it down, stepping only to the heel of the non-working foot, that way you can't cheat off the bottom foot, and going back up. Now you're doing a Patrick step up. You're doing just a plain old reverse step up. How strong are you with your knee over your toe? And a client could start that at 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches. I found an optimal height to ensure that you don't overdo it. And I like to get measurements, right? Like I'd rather know like what's a fair amount. So based on training thousands of athletes, I like going up to a 6 inch or 15 centimeter step or box, whatever you've got, platform. I like going up to about 15 centimeters, which is 6 inches, depending on who's listening. And if it's for longevity, just doing that with your body weight alone, now we'll get eccentric load on those muscles that protect your knee. But if you want to be an athlete, you want to get to where that's really pain-free and easy with your own body weight on your back. That would represent one of the knee ability standards. I mean, it's something that I found you don't have to have any special genetics. To me, a standard is something that any athlete could achieve, but that puts you in the upper 1% of athletes. So not every athlete could necessarily be, the top athlete in the nation or something like that. But even the shittiest of genetic guys can actually be great athletes. So as I was going through and trying to bulletproof my knees, I'm describing this process of the things I'm doing. Well, everything I've described so far now of getting stronger with the sled backwards and getting stronger on a reverse step up, I'm now improving the range of motion of my ankles on the reverse step up and the strength of the legs and the soleus to put force in vertically to jump. And I can go into a jump. When you can go into a jump without pain, you can exert yourself harder. So before I knew it, I was dunking, something I had never expected to do in my life. So it was funny that what killed my knees was trying to jump higher. And what ended up causing me to jump higher was fixing my knees. So I've described those two exercises, and that's a really simple foundation, but there does seem to be something magical about letting your knees bend all the way down, right? They even call that like an Asian squat, when you let your heels come up and you bend them all the way down. But as you know, for those of us who have had injuries between sides, it's not necessarily as simple as just saying, oh, just start hammering away full ass to grass squats, right? So for that, you can start by elevating a foot, and you can do it one side at a time. And you even get nice hip flexor lengthening out of it. So this is the ATG split squat. And these exercises have become popular enough that anyone can go on, they can go online, whether they do my thing or not. They can look up backward sled drag. They can look up Patrick step up and see a dozen different tutorials on it. They can look up ATG split squat. So it's an ass to grass squat one side at a time that completely regresses. So, your grandma can get into these exercises. I would say those three are the big three in order. Now think about this with the ATG split squat. The better you get at ATG split squat, now a deep knee bend for someone like me who used to cringe at that idea, all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, that doesn't hurt anymore. So the better you get at the ATG split squat, the more gains you can get out of a deep squat, because any difference between knees can manifest then when you do a double-legged squat. So any imbalance between sides could then become problematic, and you would get people like, ass to grass squats, those don't feel right for me. Well, the more ATG split squats you do, the more an ass to grass squat feels right. And depending if we have some serious athletes listening, the number one thing against an ass to grass squat would be, but you can't use as much weight as a half squat. Well, just throw chains on the bar. So now you can still go all the way down. Let's say your maximum was 100 kilos at the bottom and 150 kilos, you know, for a half squat. Well, now you can put 50 kilos of chains and get like damn near the world's best squat workout. On the other hand, the Patrick step-up's working that top range, the split squat's working the bottom range. So as I started doing more and more of this stuff, I started realizing, holy shit, I don't even need these exercises that we think we have to have. Squat, power clean. But wait a second, why don't we all have 40-inch verticals? Why aren't we all world-class speedsters? So I started realizing that the exercise science system itself is really looking at life through a straw to think that squat, bench, deadlift, power clean are going to make us all athletic. That's simply not proving to be true. So the layers I laid so far of backward sledding 1, Patrick step up 2, ATG split squat 3, now a full ass to grass squat 4, which I like using a slant board for those. Okay. And then 5 would be finally that scary thing you see me do where I do a full on sissy squat, right? But look at the foundation we've laid. So I don't even force people to do the sissy squat. But again, it seems to be where the better someone gets at that, the more athletic they get, the more protected they get. And you can elevate up a pad in front of you so that literally if you just stand there on 2 legs and reach your knees over your toes even an inch without your glutes bending, so contract your glutes like you're trying to crack a nut, you know, between your glutes, and then reach your knees forward, you just did a KOT squat, a knees over toes squat. I only altered the name slightly because sissy squat has this negative connotation with it. Plus it sounds like you're a sissy, even though it comes from Sisyphus, this Greek mythology character who had the strongest quads in the universe. But then when I started calling it a Sisyphus squat, people thought it sounded like I was getting people texting in the comments, I don't want to do a syphilis squat, which is like a venereal disease. So I'm like, oh my God, between sissy and syphilis, this is just a mess. So if your glutes stay contracted and you reach your knees over your toes, that's a knees over toes squat. It keeps the terminology simple. So those 5 would represent, so rather than just like squat for your quads or maybe throwing some leg extensions, which your foot doesn't push through the ball of the foot, so you don't activate the VMO. Even a leg press doesn't prioritize the VMO. Maybe you think that's well-rounded. Well, we just laid out hitting it from like every angle. The top position with the Patrick step up, the bottom position with the ATG split squat. The squat actually works the mid position, even though it appears to work the bottom position. Because with an ATG split squat, imagine when your leg is bent, as you know what it's like, when you push out of the hole, you don't go up, you go back. So it gets ridiculously easy once you get to the midpoint. So an ATG split squat really overloads the fullest bend. Whereas with an ass to grass squat, when you explode out and that thigh hits parallel, that's like the toughest point to get through. And then the KOT squat hits like a completely outer range. So we're really hitting the quads from 4 different layers there. Then on the backside, I want every athlete that I'm training to be stronger in a Nordic, stronger eccentric hamstring strength than anyone he's competing against. And instead of deadlifts, I'm hitting Jefferson curl for the rounded back to protect when we get out of position. Then an abs to bench seated good morning, which is the closest that the thigh and the torso come of any lift, to then a Romanian deadlift with full stretch, which hits the 90-degree position, to then a single-legged back extension holding the top of each rep. So now we're getting strong at the top. So I've even driven up guys' squats and deadlifts by using this approach of getting strong through the full strength curve with different lifts for each part, each with measurable standards, so you know which part am I weaker in. So I've had athletes, again, who they have these big squats and deadlifts, and then they're slow at top speed, and they say, how come and we go out to the track with lasers, and I burn them in a top speed sprint. And they're going, how are you beating me at top speed? I do these power lifts or whatever. I say, well, actually, I'm stronger than you are. They say, no, you're not stronger than me. Well, then we go back and do a single-legged back extension, and I'm literally just stronger than they are. So there's actually a lot of different areas of strength. I use 22 areas of strength with measurable standard, not just bench, squat, deadlift. So what started out as an obsession with knees is I really think I think squat, bench, deadlift is awesome. Those are power lifts. That's a sport in itself. But I found I can transform someone's athleticism with more accuracy and more bulletproofing by breaking up every individual component, finding each weak link, rebalancing the body, and getting strong through an entire range. Meaning a squat and a deadlift, you're really only getting strong in the mid position. You're not hitting each end of your back and your legs. And then same with the bench becomes very limited. Though for my sport, basketball, I personally don't do as much upper body, but it follows similar concepts that, to me, with about 8 different upper body exercises, I can hit all that. So I use 8 upper exercises, and then I use 14 exercises for the ankle and knee and hip and spine. And I mean, we didn't even go into ankles, and then, similar things come about there. The tibialis muscle, that's the muscle right below your kneecap, right below that patellar tendon. And I mean, that one doesn't even have a study. We haven't even bothered to do a study on that one yet. Yet it's the first line of defense against the deceleration knee injuries in the first place. So in my system, we train the tibialis muscle like other people train their bench press. I mean, you get what you put energy on life. So, okay, I did 30 sets of chest this week. I did 3 sets of calf raises, no knees over toes, and 0 tibialis raises in the last year. And then I wonder why I can't decelerate and why my knee hurts and I have shin splints. And now I'm going to go spend thousands on physio. Well, you're just pouring energy into putting more pressure into your knees without pouring energy into being able to handle that. So I know I've just ranted like crazy there, but that's what I'm here for. And everything I said is actionable. At least I'm not talking about esoteric concepts and, that if you just do barefoot training, everything magically aligns and shit like that, which has some value, but everything I just said there, it's all actionable value. Plus it's all the steps that I took. It's not, I'm not like a 60-year-old coach who never was athletic, who got lucky to train a famous client who's now trying to tell people what to do. I'm living proof with my own body. It's, bulletproof 365 days a year. I've doubled my vertical jump. And yeah, this is the exact route I took. So now I'll shut up and give it back to you.
Well, Ben, I mean, you're on here to talk about your thing, buddy. So that was a superb rant. And one I've heard quite a few times before, and I think you have a real great way of kind of layering out how the program works. And I do think that, for people listening, certainly when you first start hearing about new concepts and probably people start thinking, okay, well, maybe this is something I need to start exploring. It can be quite an overwhelming thought process. Where do I even start? But I think what you do very well is, the creation of standards. And certainly for me, I've been in the strength and conditioning world as a coach for over 10 years. And, you get very wrapped up in just how many options there are out there, like you're constantly toying between variance versus progressive overload. And, like, when is the right time to change something? And, truth be told, I was exposed to the Poliquin step up, the Peterson step up, split squats, from Charles Poliquin 10 years ago. Yet, they never were a core. Yeah, they were never a core fundamental part of the program. Yeah, go, Ben.
Yeah. But for the record, just so someone isn't confused, I actually use all those. I described the reverse step up, right? And I called it a Patrick step up. So a Patrick step up just means the box is flat. A Poliquin step up means it's on a slant board, which actually activates the VML harder. So to me, whatever someone can do in a Patrick step up, you could then match in a Poliquin step up for really nice stabilizing effects. And then you could try to match that in a Peterson step up where you're using a flat box, but you have to lift your own heel. So now it's forcing your foot and your calf muscles, and it's an even tougher VMO contraction. But that Peterson one is really tough for beginners. So I just want to be clear. I do use all 3, but it's simpler. Okay, now with the slant board, what's the angle? How big is your shoe? It's harder to put a standard there. And then with the Peterson step up, well, exactly how high is the heel coming up, or this or that? So I like to use those 2 and match your strength that you're doing in the Patrick step up for someone like yourself who is really into it, you know what I mean? And willing to get different equipment and study and focus. So I just wanted to be clear. I didn't throw out those other 2. I just try to give people a base. And since the Patrick step up, you can use an exact measurable height of a box. It's a little simpler for people to get into basically. And it's a simpler measurable. Anyways, I did want to be clear for those listeners who have followed Poliquin. I have an article about the Poliquin step up coming out Monday. You're going to see me go live on it. I already wrote the article and filmed a video on it. And then the next Monday, I'm going live discussing the Peterson step up. So I do use those things. I just want to be clear. So someone's like, oh man, this guy's throwing out those, you know what I mean? Those tools. But as to what you're saying, a lot of these things are used as like a lot of Poliquin's genius accessory tools. I took those ideas and went, now wait a second, training the tibialis, 6 weeks out of the year and you would see it and it's like, this is genius, the idea of it, but maybe you're doing like 20 sets in the entire year in a program that he would write me. What if I try to get the strongest tibialis in the fucking planet? You see what I mean? And so it's kind of like looking at these tools and then figuring out what are your goals. So there's a lot of people like me who just never want to get hurt, who want to run faster and jump higher. It doesn't mean you can't also spend the time building these other areas. So a coach like yourself, now you know all your tools, right? So you can use the right tools for the right person. Whereas for me, I'm going to live this life of forcing extreme bulletproofing on my body. I'm not going to do the power lifts. I'm not going to do the Olympic lifts. That way I can be a product of what I'm doing. So someone like yourself, you can learn all these different things and then help the right client with the right tools. So I wanted to be clear on that as well. It's not like I think this is the only way, but my system is all about bulletproofing. And that way, if I'm not doing anything else, then I'll know, I know exactly where my results are coming from. And Paul Ekman's genius on some of these things, I just turned his accessory into some of my main course.
Yeah, I actually think that's what I thought was genius, because with PICP and Poliquin, it was the Poliquin step up is something we're going to use at the start of the off season as we start to rebuild, and then we're quickly going to phase that out and we're going to progress on to back squatting. And I thought having the standards provides some clarity now as to just how important these movements are. For someone even like myself who's always had bulletproofing my knees as kind of a primary objective with all my sporting endeavors, would still, when I actually saw your standards as to what was what you deemed to be, like a gold standard for a Patrick step up, and, going into the gym first day and seeing where I was at and seeing just how far away I was from having, being able to meet that standard, was suddenly like an extra motivation, and actually brought clarity just to how important the exercise was and just how long you could progress on that one exercise and still get good results.
Yep. Well, I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you, it's tough to look at anything that's new, you know what I mean? And so that's why I do work really hard to explain the why behind each thing and to make some of these qualifying, statements that, I'm just trying to do my part within the industry. So like you said, with the standards, it helps to know a mark so that, like you were saying, okay, we're going to do such and such at the start of preseason, but not everyone's the same, right? So some guys can hit that much sooner than others. So having a standard to know, okay, this amount, puts me in the upper 1% of protection. Maybe for one guy, he hits that in a few weeks. Maybe for another guy, he actually needs to do it for a few years, but maybe he's been training his squats for the last, maybe 8 years ago, he was squatting just as much as he is now. Now he puts in some of these weak links and he sees it actually drive up. So like a real world example, you probably know about, like, bobsledders are some of the best guys in the weight room that you'll ever see. Like for the US, you have to power clean like 330 pounds, 150 kilo power clean, and 3 rep ass to grass, 200 kilo, 440 pound squat. So I had a few guys who were all like just under that, like right there, a few bobsledders, and they wanted to be able to crush that. And so I had them for 6 weeks. I had them 6 days a week do ATG split squat and seated good morning. So by the end, they were slinging around their own body weight in additional load, flat ground ATG split squats, abs, bench, seated good mornings. Then at the end of the 6 weeks, they all went back. They were all they all actually squatted close to 500 pounds ass to grass, and they were power cleaning that 150 kilo like it was nothing. So for them, people who had been grinding away at squats and power cleans for many years, and then getting them to a world-class level on the component breakdown of a squat, which is an ATG split squat plus a seated good morning, that was actually what was able to jack up their lift more than just continuing to do the same thing, which had plateaued for a couple of years for them at that point. So that's just an example of how those can play out. And I do have, for each lift, I try to have a standard, which is what anyone can get to. But then I also put what I consider like a world-class mark, which no one I've ever seen can do the world-class mark on all the exercises. Anyone can get to the standard on all the exercises, but the world-class mark would mean, like, if you want to be a rock climber, or you want to be, oh, I got a little babies going. If you want to be a world-class speed cyclist, you're not going to be able to hit the upper body standards that the rock climber had. Like it would be almost physically impossible, right? No, I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but it allows you, once someone has the standards, you could look and go, okay, what am I just trying to maintain that? Or am I trying to get world class in some endeavor? So then I shared the numbers, like I said there, getting to half your body weight, flat ground, split squat, abs to bench, seated, good morning, half body weight is very good and puts you in an elite mark of strength and flexibility. But getting to your entire body weight and additional load, yeah, now you're setting yourself up for like world record type performance.
Awesome. Ben, I mean, I know we had about a 30-minute time cap, and we're probably just about exceeding that. And the wee baby's starting to let you know that it's time, Dad, to cut the podcast. So Ben, just to finish up, where can people find out about what you do, and if they want to be involved in the programs and the coaching that you're offering, how do they get involved?
I would say best would be to follow my Instagram at Knees Over Toes Guy, because I keep a lot of stuff on there. I try to put valuable content on there every single day. And then people can even, I answer all my DMs, so people can shoot me a question and find out more, based on their needs, what I might have to offer. But that way they can take their time, get to know me, start studying stuff, decide if they want to do my programs or if they just want to, take bits and pieces.
Awesome. Well, Ben, I'll be including all that information in the show notes. Baby's really letting you know now, so I'm going to let you go,
Yeah.
mate. But I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's been a crazy year for you. Congratulations on the new baby. Mate, just keep up all the awesome work that you're putting out there.
Hey, I really appreciate you. Let me know when it's out, and I'll post about it and send people your way as well. Really appreciate you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. Have a lovely day.
All right. You too, man.